Boom! Across the vast, endless ocean, it seemed as if a massive storm had suddenly erupted, with towering waves continually rising and crashing, creating deafening sounds that resembled the roar of destruction itself, shaking all who heard it. Beneath these mighty waves, Mu Chen's figure stood immovable like a boulder. Even when the immense waves came crashing down, they failed to move him in the slightest. Around him, his spiritual energy was contained, with no trace of it leaking out. Only a faint, golden light flowed across the surface of his skin. Unlike before, the golden glow had not grown brighter. Instead, it seemed to have dimmed, as if it had been compressed under the earth for countless years, thick and heavy like true gold. And just as the waves continued to crash toward him, Mu Chen, who had kept his eyes tightly closed for an entire year, finally began to slowly open them. Boom! His eyes, once pitch black, had turned into a dazzling golden color, streams of golden light. As solid, as substance, mixed with an overwhelming, indescribable spiritual energy that shot out from his eyes, piercing through the air in front of him. The ocean's surface was instantly torn open by these two golden beams, creating a deep pit about 100 feet wide. After a brief moment, the ocean slowly began to fill the gap. The golden light surged in Mu Chen's eyes. If one looked carefully, they would see that his body was trembling faintly. His palms were clenched tightly, and the veins on his arms wriggled like coiling dragons. With every movement, it seemed like terrifying power was being released, causing the nearby air to hum with pressure. At this moment, Mu Chen's heart was filled with excitement. Only he knew just how powerful the spiritual energy in his divine sea had become, how vast and overwhelming it was. In fact, he even suspected that if he continued to cultivate, the divine sea itself might not be able to withstand it and would explode. Every meridian, every vein, every cell in his body was filled with an immense spiritual force. If anyone were to suddenly attack him at this moment, they would only need a small spark of spiritual energy to shatter the already fragile control he had over his power. At that time, his spiritual energy would burst forth uncontrollably. Even with his dragon phoenix body, he would likely be wiped out by the explosion of such wild, uncontrollable energy. He was like a volcano on the verge of erupting. However, if he could manage to channel and control the explosive power of this volcano, the rewards would be immense and something that countless people would envy. Almost there, feeling the wild spiritual energy surging within him, Mu Chen murmured to himself, then immediately stopped hesitating. His face became serious as he formed a seal with his hands in front of him. Boom! The moment the seal was formed, Mu Chen's body seemed to shudder violently. Immediately, his skin turned a deep red, and blood began to seep from his pores. But at this moment, Mu Chen paid no attention to the pain. His focus was entirely on the terrifying force within him. The boundless spiritual energy within his divine sea surged out like a flood, crashing through his body like an enraged dragon. Wherever it passed, his meridians twisted and his flesh burned with pain, even forcing blood to be driven inward. The terrifying power seemed as though it was going to completely destroy Mu Chen from the inside out. An indescribable pain surged through his body, but Mu Chen's eyes never wavered. This was a preparation he had made long ago when he decided to suppress his spiritual energy and break through with an explosive force. According to his estimation, 2 years of hard training and regular cultivation would probably only allow him to break through to the 8th grade supreme. After all, unlike Xun'er, he had not inherited the immortal bird's inheritance blood, so it was impossible for him to leap over 2 levels so easily. Humans were different from divine beasts. The former advanced steadily, while many divine beasts often stagnated for 1,000 days, only making massive progress in one leap. In the past, Xun'er was far stronger than Mu Chen, but he had caught up step by step. Now, it seemed that Xun'er's explosive moment had arrived. Therefore, if Mu Chen wanted to use this opportunity to further enhance his power, he had to take some other measures, such as absorbing spiritual energy to accumulate and release it all at once. However, this method also had its drawbacks. The suppressed energy was so powerful that it might be impossible to bear, possibly leading to a destructive crisis. However, this danger posed no significant threat to Mu Chen, who had undergone numerous trials between life and death over the years. Thus, without hesitation, he chose this path. Boom, boom. The vast and immense spiritual energy inside Mu Chen's body surged wildly, his eyes growing redder and redder. By the end, blood began to drip from the corners of his eyes, resembling blood tears from a distance. His body was also covered in bloodlines. As if it were on the verge of shattering. On the stone island, Jiu stared anxiously at the scene. She understood that Mu Chen's breakthrough was at its most critical moment. If he failed, 2 years of hard training would be wasted. And he might even severely injure himself. Roar, just as Jiu was on edge. A roar akin to a dragon's cry suddenly resounded amidst the crashing waves. Mu Chen abruptly rose to his feet, completely disregarding the bloodlines on his body. In that instant, he ignited all the spiritual energy within him. An indescribable wave of spiritual energy exploded outward, and the seawater within a 10,000 zhang radius of Mu Chen was forcibly pushed down to the seabed, forming a colossal vortex. Around the vortex, towering waves were forcibly pushed away. There, thunderous roar getting closer, only to quietly dissipate before reaching the stone island. Jiu's gaze remained fixed on the vast vortex above the sea. There, spiritual light erupted, and Mu Chen's figure stood suspended in the air. A powerful wave of spiritual energy surged from his body, rapidly increasing at an astonishing speed. 7th grade supreme, peak of 7th grade supreme, 8th grade supreme, in just a few moments. The spiritual energy emanating from Mu Chen's body accumulated to the level of 7th grade supreme, before breaking through in a powerful surge, stepping directly into the 8th grade supreme level. He broke through to the 8th grade. Jiu exclaimed in delight. Beside her, a palace-dressed, translucent beauty smiled faintly and said, "It seems he hasn't reached his limit. This little fellow certainly has great ambitions. Do you think you will break through to 9th grade supreme?" Jiu couldn't help but ask. However, as she spoke, her expression grew more serious, without too much excitement. She knew Mu Chen was steady in his cultivation. Even though he had been training hard for 2 years, a rapid breakthrough might have some after effects. If he goes all out, it's not impossible for him to break through to 9th grade supreme. But in that case, he would have to bear some consequences, the palace-dressed beauty said lightly. Her insight was sharp, and she could see the potential for Mu Chen to break through to 9th grade supreme. But just as Jiu feared, sometimes taking too big a step was not a good thing. Jiu nodded lightly, her gaze then shifting to the figure in the distance above the sea. Her jade hand clenched unconsciously. Under their watch, the spiritual energy from Mu Chen's body continued to grow stronger within the vast spiritual light. In just a dozen breaths, the spiritual energy wave surpassed the normal 8th grade supreme level, gradually approaching the peak of 8th grade supreme. Dozens of breaths passed, and the spiritual energy from Mu Chen's body was now as dark as a storm cloud, overwhelming in its might. Jiu's heart tightened as she observed the scene. From the looks of it, if Mu Chen wished to, he could step directly into 9th grade supreme with a single stride. Once he reached this level, the Earth Supreme realm seemed within reach. A super powerhouse was now becoming infinitely close. Boom. As expected, the spiritual energy wave from Mu Chen's body surged again. In just a dozen breaths, his spiritual energy reached the limit of 8th grade supreme, and finally, it exploded violently. Jiu sensed that the spiritual energy had broken through the barrier of 8th grade supreme, as if it were stepping into 9th grade supreme. Sigh. Jiu sighed softly in her heart. The palace-dressed beauty beside her shook her head. If he has no self-control now, when he wants to break through to Earth Supreme in the future, he will certainly face a lot of hardships. As a former super divine beast and a peak heavenly supreme, she naturally understood that there were countless 9th grade supremes in this world, but very few could successfully break through to the Earth Supreme level. This was because, during the previous stages of cultivation, even the slightest mistake could cause one to remain at the 9th grade Supreme level, unable to advance further. Although Mu Chen did not face such a severe issue, it would still consume more energy and time in the future. Just as their thoughts shifted, both women were suddenly surprised and looked toward the distant sea. They had noticed that the spiritual energy fluctuations, which were originally increasing rapidly, had been forcefully suppressed just as they were about to enter the 9th grade supreme level. In the distance, the boundless spiritual energy surged like a tidal wave, and there, a young, slender figure stood in midair, his body radiating a faint golden light. A subtle but distinct pressure emanated from him. Jiu's tightly clenched hand finally loosened, revealing a hint of unmasked joy on her beautiful face. The elegant woman beside her also nodded lightly, a look of satisfaction appearing in her eyes. This Mu Chen certainly hasn't disappointed. It seems that, someday in the future, he might indeed be qualified to inherit the power of this place. At this moment, Mu Chen had resisted the temptation to break through to the 9th grade Supreme but had already overcome the shackles of the 8th grade Supreme. He had reached half-step 9th grade. Above the vast ocean, the immense spiritual energy cascaded down like a long rainbow, forming colorful clouds in the sky. In the center of it all, Chen stood, his body surrounded by overflowing spiritual energy that he could hardly control. His robe fluttered, making a sound as if it was being struck by an invisible wind, causing the surrounding air to hum with resonance. At this moment, his tightly closed eyes slowly opened, revealing a glimmer of spiritual light. The blood veins that had appeared to almost break on his skin vanished completely. Half-step 9th grade. Chen lowered his head, staring at his long hand, feeling the vast spiritual energy surging within him. Even his calm demeanor couldn't help but stir with excitement. When he left the Northern Heaven Spiritual Academy, he had not yet formed the Supreme Dharmakaya. When he first entered the Great Luo Heaven domain, he was only a first-grade Supreme. However, after years of arduous training and challenges, he had finally reached the pinnacle of the Supreme stage today. As long as he could break through the 9th-grade Supreme barrier, he would enter the realm of a super-strong being, Earth Supreme. Once he reached this level, he would have the right to travel across the great thousand worlds. He would truly become one of the super-strong. At that time, he would finally have the qualifications and strength to venture to the Luo God clan. What once seemed far away now felt within reach. And Chen couldn't help but be moved by this realization. All the hardships of these years of cultivation had not been in vain. Chen smiled slightly, turning inward to observe his own body. He examined the supreme sea within him, which had grown many times more vast than before his seclusion. The spiritual energy it contained was far stronger than before. Moreover, it was much more condensed. Upon closer inspection, one could see transparent flames flickering within the spiritual energy, infusing it with vibrant vitality. It's the undying flame I absorbed earlier. Chen smiled inwardly. It seemed that during his years of hard training, the undying flame he had absorbed had completely fused with the spiritual energy, making it a great gain. Although the undying flame appeared inconspicuous, Chen knew that once his spiritual energy was infused with it, it would bring continuous vitality, much like an unending cycle of life. Even though he was only at half-step 9th grade, if it came down to comparing spiritual energy, even a true 9th grade Supreme might not stand a chance against him. Chen smiled faintly, his thoughts withdrawing from the divine sea space. And then he turned to look at his arms. There, the spirits of the true dragon and true phoenix lay coiled in stillness. Their size seemed unchanged, but their color had undergone a drastic transformation. The once brilliant golden hue had completely turned into a dark golden shade, with traces of purple light now blending in. As though sensing Chen's gaze, the true dragon and true phoenix spirits suddenly opened their eyes. In an instant, two powerful presences of the true dragon and true phoenix overwhelmed the surroundings, causing the sea surface to sink slightly under the immense pressure. Noticing this powerful pressure, Chen's eyes gleamed. Such a force could easily suppress even an 8th grade Supreme, leaving them unable to move. Completely powerless to resist. Clearly, during his 2 years of secluded cultivation, the spirits of the true dragon and true phoenix had undergone a tremendous transformation, aided by the unique energy of this place. Now, if Chen were to encounter Bai Ming again, he might not even need to take action himself. With just the pressure from the true dragon and true phoenix spirits, that person would likely be forced to the ground. This retreat has truly been rewarding, Chen thought to himself. Feeling the growth within him, a satisfied look appeared in his eyes. According to the time rules of this place, he had been in seclusion for 2 years, but in the great thousand worlds, only 6 months had passed. Boom! Across the vast, endless ocean, it seemed as if a massive storm had suddenly erupted, with towering waves continually rising and crashing, creating deafening sounds that resembled the roar of destruction itself, shaking all who heard it. Beneath these mighty waves, Chen's figure stood immovable like a boulder. Even when the immense waves came crashing down, they failed to move him in the slightest. Around him, his spiritual energy was contained, with no trace of it leaking out. Only a faint golden light flowed across the surface of his skin. Unlike before, the golden glow had not grown brighter. Instead, it seemed to have dimmed, as if it had been compressed under the earth for countless years, thick and heavy like true gold. And just as the waves continued to crash toward him, Chen, who had kept his eyes tightly closed for an entire year, finally began to slowly open them. Boom! His eyes, once pitch black, had turned into a dazzling golden color, streams of golden light, as solid as substance, mixed with an overwhelming, indescribable spiritual energy that shot out from his eyes, piercing through the AI in front of him. The ocean's surface was instantly torn open by these two golden beams, creating a deep pit about 100 feet wide. After a brief moment, the ocean slowly began to fill the gap. The golden light surged in Mu Chen's eyes. If one looked carefully, they would see that his body was trembling faintly. His palms were clenched tightly, and the veins on his arms wriggled like coiling dragons. With every movement, it seemed like terrifying power was being released, causing the nearby air to hum with pressure. At this moment, Mu Chen's heart was filled with excitement. Only he knew just how powerful the spiritual energy in his divine sea had become, how vast and overwhelming it was. In fact, he even suspected that if he continued to cultivate, the divine sea itself might not be able to withstand it and would explode. Every meridian, every vein, every cell in his body was filled with an immense spiritual force. If anyone were to suddenly attack him at this moment, they would only need a small spark of spiritual energy to shatter the already fragile control he had over his power. That time, his spiritual energy would burst forth uncontrollably. Even with his dragon phoenix body, he would likely be wiped out by the explosion of such wild, uncontrollable energy. He was like a volcano on the verge of erupting. However, if he could manage to channel and control the explosive power of this volcano, the rewards would be immense and something that countless people would envy. Almost there, feeling the wild spiritual energy surging within him, Mu Chen murmured to himself, then immediately stopped hesitating. His face became serious as he formed a seal with his hands in front of him. Boom! The moment the seal was formed, Mu Chen's body seemed to shudder violently. Immediately, his skin turned a deep red, and blood began to seep from his pores. But at this moment, Mu Chen paid no attention to the pain. His focus was entirely on the terrifying force within him, the boundless spiritual energy within his divine sea surged out like a flood, crashing through his body like an enraged dragon. Wherever it passed, his meridians twisted and his flesh burned with pain, even forcing blood to be driven inward. The terrifying power seemed as though it was going to completely destroy Mu Chen. From the inside out, an indescribable pain surged through his body, but Mu Chen's eyes never wavered. This was a preparation he had made long ago when he decided to suppress his spiritual energy and break through with an explosive force. According to his estimation, 2 years of hard training and regular cultivation would probably only allow him to break through to the 8th grade supreme. After all, unlike Nine Nether, he had not inherited the immortal bird's inheritance blood, so it was impossible for him to leap over 2 levels so easily. Humans were different from divine beasts. The former advanced steadily, while many divine beasts often stagnated for 1,000 days only, making massive progress in one leap. In the past, Nine Nether was far stronger than Mu Chen, but he had caught up step by step. Now, it seemed that Nine Nether's explosive moment had arrived. Therefore, if Mu Chen wanted to use this opportunity to further enhance his power, he had to take some other measures, such as absorbing spiritual energy to accumulate and release it all at once. However, this method also had its drawbacks. The suppressed energy was so powerful that it might be impossible to bear, possibly leading to a destructive crisis. However, this danger posed no significant threat to Mu Chen, who had undergone numerous trials between life and death over the years. Thus, without hesitation, he chose this path. Boom! Boom! The vast and immense spiritual energy inside Mu Chen. How had Nine Nether grown so powerful in just over half a year? Exchanging uncertain glances, they dared not question further and swiftly turned to lead the way. Elder Council. When Patriarch Tian Huang and the elders of the Nine Nether Sparrow clan saw Mu Chen and Nine Nether standing in the Great Hall, a flicker of surprise crossed their expressions, though it was hardly unexpected. Nine Nether, you Patriarch Tian Huang could not help but speak. In a mere 6 months, Nine Nether had risen from a 7th grade supreme to a 9th grade supreme. In Mu Chen, he had advanced from a 6th grade supreme to the threshold of the 9th grade. Even for someone as well-versed as Patriarch Tian Huang, such progress was astonishing. Nine Nether smiled slightly and said, I obtained the immortal bird inheritance blood, and both of us received guidance from the immortal phoenix beast sovereign. That's why our strength has soared. She deliberately omitted any mention of the Divine Sea space. Its allure was far too great. Even Earth Supreme-level experts would covet it, and the key to entering it lay solely in Mu Chen's hands. If word got out, it could bring him unnecessary trouble. So it was indeed the immortal Phoenix Beast Sovereign. Patriarch Tian Huang and the elders nodded in realization, though they knew things were likely more complex than Nine Nether had revealed. However, since she chose not to elaborate, they had no grounds to press further. Regardless, this was undoubtedly good news for the Nine Nether Sparrow clan. Exchanging glances, Patriarch Tian Huang and the elders turned their gaze toward Mu Chen. Their once stern expression softened. Mu Chen had not only helped Nine Nether acquire the inheritance blood, but had also contributed to her meteoric rise in power, an act that earned their appreciation. Mu Chen, from this day forward, we have no objections to the bloodline bond between you and Nine Nether. We only hope that you will both exercise caution in the days ahead, Patriarch Tian Huang said solemnly. Thank you, Patriarch and esteemed elders. Mu Chen cupped his hands in gratitude. He felt relieved. The matter had been resolved peacefully. With Nine Nether mediating, he had no desire to be at odds with the Nine Nether Sparrow clan. Additionally, Patriarch Tian Huang paused briefly before continuing. After our discussions, we wish to invite you to become an elder of the Nine Nether Sparrow clan. What do you think? Mu Chen and Nine Nether were momentarily stunned. The position of elder within the Nine Nether Sparrow clan required at least the strength of a 9th grade supreme. It represented the clan's strongest foundation. Even with Mu Chen's current half-step 9th grade cultivation, he was technically unqualified. More importantly, he was not even a member of the Nine Nether Sparrow clan. This was a title of significant importance. If he managed it well, the Nine Nether Sparrow clan could become a formidable support for him in the future, an even greater force than Great Luo Heaven Domain. And such a powerful backing was something Mu Chen would undoubtedly need in the days to come. After only a brief moment of hesitation, Mu Chen smiled and cupped his fists. I have no objections. Seeing Mu Chen accept, Patriarch Tian Huang and the elders visibly relaxed. Their gazes toward Mu Chen grew even warmer, carrying a newfound sense of kinship. Oh, and one more thing. Patriarch Tian Huang suddenly raised his hand, sending a jade slip flying toward Mu Chen. Not long ago, Mandala, the domain lord of Great Luo Heaven Domain, sent a message for you. Mu Chen took the jade slip, crushed it with a firm grip, and immediately, his pupils contracted sharply. Inside the jade slip, there was only a faint message, but it made Mu Chen's heart churn with overwhelming emotions. The ancient heavenly palace has appeared. Hurry back. Northern Domain. Since the Grand Hunting War ended, the once most powerful force in the Northern Domain, the Divine Hall, was destroyed, leading to a turbulent situation in the Northern Domain. After all, the Divine Hall had immense foundations, and all the top forces were eager to take a bite to grow their own strength. In such a situation, the Great Luo Heaven Domain rose at an astonishing speed. In less than a year, it had expanded into the true dominant power in the Northern Domain. Meanwhile, the Northern Realm Alliance, formed by Mandala and other top forces, gradually gained real significance under Mandala's control. With her formidable strength as a perfected Earth Supreme, Mandala subtly became the leader of this alliance. Even the leaders of other top forces chose to tacitly accept this, as both Mandala and the Great Luo Heaven Domain were undeniably the strongest forces in the Northern Domain. This reputation and status of the Great Luo Heaven Domain made it the most sought-after background for countless powerful individuals across the Northern Domain. In just under a year, countless experts flocked to the Great Luo Heaven Domain, seeking various ways to join. As a result, this accelerated the expansion of the Great Luo Heaven Domain. However, such rapid growth inevitably led to some trouble. The old, established experts of the Great Luo Heaven Domain found themselves in conflict with the newly joined experts over interests and power, causing tensions to rise. Even Mandala didn't have a good solution for this. After all, this was a natural outcome of expansion, and for now, they could only wait for time to smooth things over. Today, the Great Luo Heaven was unusually lively. The sky above was filled with light and shadows, rushing through the air and landing in all directions. The entire Great Luo Heaven seemed to be in a state of excitement. Today was another royal meeting in the Great Luo Heaven Domain. The scale of the royal meetings held by the Great Luo Heaven Domain had greatly expanded, alongside the domain's rapid growth. Now, there were already 18 kings in the domain. This was the result of Mandala's careful selection. If kings were appointed based on pure strength, the number might have been far higher. However, Even after Mandala's careful control, the presence of so many new kings had caused a considerable impact on the original balance of the Great Luo Heaven domain. Even old kings like the Xun'er King, Blood Eagle King, and Mountain Splitting King had begun to sense some threats. Every royal meeting had the potential for new kings, or even emperors, to emerge. Therefore, the royal meetings had become the most important event in the Great Luo Heaven domain. Whenever one was held, even the lords of the major cities would come, creating an atmosphere of great excitement. However, while the entire Great Luo Heaven was bustling with noise, the Nine Nether Palace, located in the northern part of the Great Luo Heaven, was in perfect stillness. Yet, amidst the silence, there was an overwhelming aura. Inside the vast palace, soldiers clad in black armor marched with military precision. Above, the sky rippled with powerful spiritual energy, with faint spiritual runes flickering, guarded by a formidable spiritual formation. The Nine Nether Palace had changed significantly since Chen and the others left. Whether in terms of the cities it governed or the number of powerful individuals, it had seen a terrifying leap forward in just half a year. After all, everyone in the Great Luo Heaven domain knew that the relationship between Chen of the Nine Nether Palace and the domain Lord Mandala was extremely close. With this connection, even the three sovereigns would give the Nine Nether Palace face, ensuring it never lacked resources. Anyone who passed by the Nine Nether Palace couldn't help but envy the power and atmosphere surrounding it. Everyone knew that the Nine Nether Palace held immense influence in the Great Luo Heaven domain, with abundant resources and powerful warriors being allocated there. It had quietly become the most powerful force in the domain. As for Mandala's favor toward the Nine Nether Palace, everyone in the Great Luo Heaven domain was envious. Naturally, some individuals were dissatisfied. According to the rumors, the two masters of the Nine Nether Palace were rumored to only possess the strength of 6th or 7th grade supremes. With such strength, although it is still considered outstanding within the Great Luo Heaven domain, it is clearly impossible to stand out. The strength that can command the vast Nine Nether Palace and acquire such enormous resources is clearly mismatched. To many newcomers in the Great Luo Heaven domain, Chen is merely someone who has done a service by offering treasures, and Mandala has extended special favor to him, but someone with such connections, unable to earn enough respect on their own, will likely struggle to command the growing number of strong individuals within Nine Nether Palace. Over time, it's only natural that the palace will fall apart. At that point, even with Mandala's support, it would be difficult to maintain, because when people's hearts are scattered, forceful measures are useless. Inside the Nine Nether Palace, in a grand main hall, while the entire Great Luo Heaven is in a state of fervor, the Nine Nether Palace remains quiet, as if the ongoing royal council held in the Great Luo Heaven domain has nothing to do with them. Of course, from a certain perspective, it indeed has little to do with them, because the two masters of Nine Nether Palace are not present, and as the chief steward, Tang Bing obviously cannot represent the palace to speak. Therefore, over the past year, Nine Nether Palace has not attended the royal councils. Tang Bing excels at managing internal affairs, but she wisely knows that, in the absence of Nine Nether and Chen, she cannot rashly voice an opinion to avoid controversy. After all, the Nine Nether Palace, due to the immense support from Mandala, has already caused some controversy behind the scenes. Inside the hall, there were many people, making it quite grand. At the head of the hall were two vacant positions, and below them sat Tang Bing and her younger sister Tang Ro, the grand stewardesses of Nine Nether Palace. Sitting next to them was a woman in a white dress, seated in a wheelchair. She was beautiful, though her face appeared somewhat pale. Her spiritual energy fluctuations weren't particularly strong, yet her position was just below Tang Bing and her sister. This woman was Xun'er Li, the battle formation master Chen had met during the Great Hunting War at the Divine Hall. After the destruction of the Divine Hall, with Chen's support, Xun'er Li and her family joined the Great Luo Heaven domain. As a battle formation master, she became highly sought after. Previously, there had only been Chen as the sole battle formation master in the Great Luo Heaven domain. Now, with another one, if she were willing, Mandala might even offer her control over the Great Luo Heaven army. However, unexpectedly, she did not choose independence. Instead, she decided to join Nine Nether Palace, where she now commanded the Nine Nether Guards. Therefore, although her spiritual power was not particularly strong, with the strength of a battle formation master, even an average 7th grade supreme would find it difficult to gain the upper hand against her. Following Xun'er Li were dozens of figures, their bodies radiating powerful spiritual energy fluctuations. Especially the four figures at the front, whose spiritual energy made it clear they had reached the level of 7th grade supreme. Such strength, even in the current Great Luo Heaven domain, would be enough to claim the title of king. These strong individuals had, of course, been dispatched by Mandala to assist Tang Bing in temporarily stabilizing the growing scale of 9 Nether Palace. Today is the Royal Council, and as usual, 9 Nether Palace will refrain from participating. The palace will remain closed for the day, Tang Bing said, gazing at the strong lineup in the hall with a sense of admiration. Although her words were expected, there was still a hint of regret. After all, such a grand event would be missed by 9 Nether Palace, which was truly a pity. I heard that at this Royal Council, Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder might attempt to contest for the position of new Emperor. This is a major event. Shouldn't 9 Nether Palace make a move? A middle-aged man, the highest ranked among the 4 7th grade Supremes, suddenly spoke up. Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder were both top-tier experts who had joined the Great Luo Heaven domain in the past year. Their strength was unmatched, with both entering the 9th grade Supreme level. Now, their influence in the domain was immense. They had long coveted the throne of the Great Luo Heaven, and although their foundations were initially weak, they were now prepared to make their move. If they succeeded in their bid for the throne, the Great Luo Heaven domain would have 5 emperors instead of 3, and the situation would change. Therefore, this middle-aged man hoped to bring 9 Nether Palace closer to these 2 new emperors, at least to form some alliances. The middle-aged man was named Xun'er. He was incredibly powerful and ranked at the top among the 4 7th grade Supremes. Although he had only recently joined the 9 Nether Palace, on the surface, he was already considered the strongest member, making him quite reputable. The moment he spoke, several people quickly voiced their agreement. After all, in the Great Luo Heaven domain, the position of the Emperor was second only to the domain lord. Tang Bing, seeing this, furrowed her brows. She was naturally familiar with both Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. In the past, she had considered visiting them on behalf of the 9 Nether Palace. But these two were very arrogant. They not only looked down on her, but even Chen, who had connections, and the 9 Nether Palace as a whole, they had always been dismissive. And in Tang Bing's view, if it weren't for the domain lord, these two proud figures would have likely ignored the 9 Nether Palace entirely. After all, even a domain lord would slightly lower their posture when facing a 9th grade Supreme, because they were the most elite force and a top-tier power, second only to the domain lord. Since these two were so indifferent, Tang Bing had no desire to force the 9 Nether Palace to approach them. Moreover, with Chen and the 9 Nether Palace absent, she had little confidence and could only put on a feigned front. As she observed the debates in the hall, Tang Bing sighed inwardly. With the 9 Nether Palace growing rapidly, her own influence had clearly diminished. The newly arrived powerhouses were strong, but they were rebellious. However, she herself wasn't powerful enough to command their full respect, so she could only maintain a fragile surface of formality. She knew about Su Kun. It was said that he had some connection with Dragon Arm Supreme and the Withered Elder. From this, it seemed he was trying to get closer to them. After all, once these two rose to power, they would undoubtedly shift the balance of the Great Luo Heaven domain, with 2 new emperors backing them. They seemed to have far more potential than a 9 Nether Palace with no master to command it. Clearly, Su Kun wasn't the only one in the hall with such thoughts. After he spoke, more voices began to join in. The peaceful atmosphere was quickly shattered, and soon, even Tang Bing couldn't suppress the growing noise. Chief Tang, Su Kun said with a slight smile, seeing that his influence was working. If you're still unwilling, then allow us to attend the king's meeting on our own. At this point, Dragon Arm Supreme and the others needed assistance, and Su Kun saw this as an opportunity to invest in them. As he stood up, several powerful figures in the hall began to follow his lead, with many more hesitating. Tang Bing watched, her face growing pale with anger. Su Kun, noticing her expression, smiled indifferently. While Tang Bing was close to the 2 palace lords, he viewed his own strength as far more important. Even if the 2 palace lords returned, he believed they would lean on him, so he wasn't afraid of offending Tang Bing. With that thought, he waved his sleeve and prepared to leave with his group. As he turned, Tang Bing suddenly stood up, her voice cold and firm. Stop. Su Kun paused, frowning as he coldly responded, Chief Tang, I'm not your subordinate. The tension in the hall immediately escalated as the 2 locked eyes. Strong figures exchanged uneasy glances. unsure of how to proceed. The atmosphere became strained, but just as things reached a breaking point, a soft laugh suddenly rang out in the hall. Heh, I never expected the Nine Nether Palace to have such lively times after half a year. The sudden voice shattered the tense silence, leaving everyone stunned. Then, as if sensing something, they looked up in unison at the two empty seats at the head of the hall. To their surprise, a man and a woman had appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. The young man, tall and handsome, was smiling warmly at the crowd. That smile, though gentle, carried an undeniable pressure that made everyone in the room feel an inexplicable sense of oppression. Tang Bing, too, was stunned. After a moment, an expression of uncontainable joy filled her face as she shouted, "Sister Jiaoyu, Mu Chen, you've returned?" When these two words reached the ears of the many powerful figures in the hall, they immediately caused a stir, and their gazes shifted toward the two figures on the platform, filled with confusion and suspicion. The two before them were none other than the two leaders of the Nine Nether Palace, Nine Nether King and Mu King. They did indeed appear quite young. But what puzzled everyone was the faint sense of oppressive pressure emanating from them. It was subtle yet undeniable. Su Kuan, who had stopped in his tracks, also looked at Mu Chen and the others with suspicion, asking cautiously, "Are you the Nine Nether King and Mu King?" His tone was more probing than respectful. After all, he was a 7th grade supreme and one of the best among them, with some fame in the northern domain. It was said that in the past, both Mu Chen and Nine Nether were only 6th or 7th grade supremes, so he felt justified in maintaining his arrogance. Mu Chen gave him a neutral glance and said, "Who are you?" Su Kuan felt a twinge of unease at Mu Chen's calm gaze, which made his heart race slightly. He involuntarily replied, "I am Su Kuan, a protector assigned to the Nine Nether Palace by the Domain Lord." Mu Chen nodded slightly, then scanned the room. Anyone who met his gaze immediately stood up and respectfully announced their names. When the last person finished, Mu Chen casually withdrew his gaze, and the oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the crowd dissipated. This brought a sense of relief to everyone, but they were also filled with confusion and shock. They couldn't understand why Mu Chen, who appeared so young, would carry such an overwhelming presence. The reports stated that Mu King and Nine Nether King were only 6th or 7th grade supremes. Zhan Tai Lu Li. I pay my respects to the two palace lords. Zhan Tai Lu Li, with her beautiful eyes, looked at Mu Chen and then slightly bowed in respect. "So it's Miss Zhan Tai." Mu Chen was a bit surprised to see Zhan Tai Lu Li among the Nine Nether Palace's ranks. However, he still smiled gently and nodded in acknowledgement. After that, his gaze shifted again to the unfamiliar, yet somewhat rebellious-looking experts in the hall. He said indifferently, "I don't care what kind of reputation you all have, but now that you're in my Nine Nether Palace, you must follow our rules. Tang Bing is the general manager chosen by Nine Nether King and me. Her authority lies just below ours, and from now on, she will govern everything." The Nine Nether Palace had grown beyond what Mu Chen and Nine Nether had expected. However, they didn't have much time to manage it, so everything was handed over to Tang Bing. Moreover, they trusted her completely. Therefore, when faced with a group of strong, seemingly powerful individuals like Su Kuan, Mu Chen and Nine Nether didn't hesitate to place their trust in Tang Bing. Su Kuan and the others were stunned upon hearing this. They hadn't expected that as soon as Mu Chen and Nine Nether returned, they would hand all authority to Tang Bing, even ordering the strong experts like them to follow her commands. In the past, when Nine Nether and Mu Chen were absent, Tang Bing was the general manager, but they hadn't shown her much respect, thinking her strength was not impressive. Over the past period, Su Kuan had even tried to undermine her authority, attempting to shake her position. But now, Mu Chen's words shattered any ambitions Su Kuan had completely. Su Kuan's eyes shifted as he gritted his teeth and said, "Mu King, although Tang Bing is an old member of the Nine Nether Palace, her strength is weak. Now that the Nine Nether Palace has grown large, with so many strong experts, if she leads, there may be many who will not submit." By the end of his words, Su Kuan raised his head and stared directly at Mu Chen. As a 7th grade supreme, his power was formidable. In the great Luo Heaven domain, he was even capable of competing for the title of king. If successful, his position would be on par with Mu Chen and Nine Nether. In his view, if Mu Chen and Nine Nether had any insight, they would realize that his value surpassed that of Tang Bing. As Su Kuan finished speaking, Several of his allies echoed in agreement, those strong figures he had lured over. Hearing these supportive voices, Su Kuan gained more confidence, straightening his previously bent body. However, when he looked at Mu Chen, he noticed that the young man's face was expressionless, his black eyes only coldly scanning the room, unmoved by the opposition. That indifferent demeanor made Su Kuan feel a wave of unease at that moment. Mu Chen slowly rose from his seat. His eyes swept over the crowd, and he spoke indifferently. "Did I say I was discussing this with you?" The plain tone carried an overwhelming sense of dominance, causing the entire hall to fall into complete silence. Many of the powerful figures felt a tremor in their hearts. Su Kuan was momentarily stunned by Mu Chen's imposing aura. He furrowed his brows and began to speak. Mu. Boom. However, just as his words left his mouth, Mu Chen's cold gaze shot toward him from the throne. The spiritual energy in the surroundings seemed to violently erupt at that very moment. Bang! A terrifying pressure swept in from all directions. Su Kuan had no time to react before he felt his body lose control. His legs went weak, and with a thud, he collapsed to his knees on the ground. The surrounding spiritual energy weighed down on him like a mountain. It felt as though if the person in front of him even harbored a hint of murderous intent, that overwhelming force could crush him into dust. At that moment, everyone in the hall sensed a terrifying surge of spiritual energy, akin to a volcano, suddenly erupting from Mu Chen's body, sweeping across the entire hall like a storm. All the powerful figures in the hall changed their expressions drastically, their eyes revealing disbelief. The surge of spiritual energy seemed to have reached the level of a 9th grade supreme. Su Kuan, kneeling on the floor, was drenched in cold sweat. Wasn't Mu King supposed to be only a 6th grade supreme? But now, this overwhelming spiritual pressure seemed to rival that of Dragon Arm Supreme and Withered Elder. Boom, boom. Many of the onlookers who had previously been observing quickly dropped to their knees. The defiant attitude they had shown earlier had disappeared completely. Facing a king whose power rivaled that of a 9th grade supreme, their own strength seemed insignificant. If they acted too rashly, they would be wiped out with a single wave. Mu Chen's indifferent gaze swept over the kneeling figures in the hall. In a calm voice, he asked, "Does anyone still have objections?" Mu Chen didn't employ any soft tactics with these future subordinates. He knew that for these rebellious individuals, the only way to completely tame them was with the most domineering and unreasonable methods. Even Su Kuan shivered, drenched in cold sweat. But he no longer dared to utter a single word. At the front, Tang Bing gazed at Mu Chen, who was now exuding an aura of sharpness and dominance. She couldn't help but secretly stick out her tongue. Compared to before, Mu Chen was now many times more imposing. The hall fell into a deep silence, with many powerful figures secretly glancing at Mu Chen and Nine Nether. The doubt in their eyes had vanished, replaced by a hint of awe. Clearly, the power Mu Chen had just revealed was deeply shocking. The Nine Nether Palace has grown to this extent, which we hadn't anticipated. Mu Chen's indifferent voice echoed through the hall, causing everyone to shudder. They clearly understood that Mu Chen was talking about not being able to stay in the Great Luo Heaven Domain, not the Nine Nether Palace itself. In the Northern Domain, being exiled from the Great Luo Heaven Domain meant that one would likely have no place left in the Northern Domain. If it had been before, the crowd might have laughed this off, but after witnessing Mu Chen's formidable power firsthand, they now realized that with his strength and his position in the Great Luo Heaven Domain, he truly had the ability to back up his words. We have no other intentions. Many powerful figures, drenched in cold sweat, quickly pledged their loyalty. Even Su Kuan, who had been so arrogant before, now dared not show any defiance. He was thoroughly subdued. Seeing the atmosphere in the hall completely cleared, Mu Chen exchanged a glance with Nine Nether, who smiled slightly, clearly satisfied with the display of dominance. Is today the royal conference? After settling the internal matters, Mu Chen finally spoke again. Tang Bing stepped forward and detailed the specifics of the royal conference. Dragon Arm Supreme? Withered Elder? Upon hearing these names, Mu Chen's expression shifted slightly. These two seemed to have been influential figures in the Northern Domain, and now they had joined the Great Luo Heaven Domain. From the looks of it, they were even vying for the Emperor title in the Great Luo Heaven Domain. They are both extremely powerful within the Great Luo Heaven Domain now, and their strength has reached the level where they are qualified to compete for the title of Emperor. Given the current situation, their chances of success may not be small. At this point, Tang Bing pouted her red lips slightly and, with some resentment, said, "But they're just too arrogant. They don't seem to hold the Nine Nether Palace in much regard." Tang Bing's words were somewhat veiled, for in her view, the Dragon-Armed Supreme and the Withered Elder likely not only looked down on their Nine Nether Palace but perhaps also on the Nine Nether and Mu Chen, the Palace Master. To them, the Nine Nether Palace might have only grown this large due to the favor of the Domain Lord, a relationship that wasn't worth giving much attention to. However, Tang Bing chose not to voice these thoughts, keeping the greater situation in mind. After listening to Tang Bing, Mu Chen's gaze turned towards Nine Nether, who also smiled faintly, clearly understanding the meaning. He then said, "Such old-timer know-it-alls can indeed be rather annoying." Mu Chen chuckled, then stood up and said, "Let's go." Tang Bing was taken aback. "Where to?" "Since it's the meeting of the kings, we naturally can't miss it." Mu Chen waved his sleeve, then smiled lightly. What followed next sent a shockwave through everyone in the Great Hall, their eyes filled with disbelief. "And also, that position of Emperor, both Nine Nether and I are quite interested in it." With the expedition to the ancient Heavenly Palace approaching, Mu Chen knew he needed to raise his standing in the Great Luo Heaven Domain as much as possible. After all, he might need to rely on the power of the Great Luo Heaven Domain at some point. So, the position of Emperor was something Mu Chen found particularly intriguing.